there is a moment that belongs only to the night. It happens when the path ahead disappears into darkness, when the familiar world falls quiet, and you realize you are standing at the edge of something you cannot see. Almost every culture on Earth has imagined this moment, not as an ending, but as a crossing. A threshold where the noise of life softens, where the rules change, where the soul steps away from the brightness of the known and into a darker, deeper passage. Death, in our oldest stories, does not arrive at noon. It does not come with sunlight or clarity or certainty. It comes at night. In myth after myth, the soul travels in darkness, across shadowed rivers, through forests without names, down winding paths lit only by memory, instinct, or a single flickering flame. The night is not punishment, it's preparation, the space between worlds. We fear the dark because we cannot see what waits within it. But our ancestors believed something different. They believed darkness was where guidance appeared, where guardians stood watch, where the dead were not abandoned, but accompanied. Guided by ferrymen, welcomed by keepers, tested by paths that asked one final question: who are you, now that everything else has fallen away? Every underworld myth begins the same way, with a descent, a journey, a long night. Not because death is cruel, but because transformation requires shadow. Just as sleep prepares us for waking, the night prepares the soul for whatever comes next. Tonight, we're not here to prove what lies beyond life, nor to debate belief. We're here to listen to the stories humans have told for thousands of years about where we go when the lights go out, about why the soul travels at night, and about what those stories reveal, not about death, but about how deeply we want meaning to continue. Because maybe the dark was never meant to frighten us. Maybe it was meant to hold us as we crossed. Hello, night wanderers, and welcome back to the hush between midnight and morning. I'm your host, Yarrow, but after hours, when the moon hangs heavy and the shadows stretch long, my friends call me YLDragons, your guide through the darker skies of folklore, dreams, and the unquiet mind. Each episode, we wander together through stories that have followed humanity for centuries, myths that flicker like lanterns in the dark, haunted histories that refuse to rest and talk about creatures born from superstition, survival, and the places our ancestors feared to look. Why? Because every legend holds a lesson, every haunting holds a heartbeat, and every dream, even the strange ones, has something to say. So settle in, dim the lights, let the night open its old stories, and let your mind breathe in the mystery. Because here in the hours when most of the world is sleeping, we explore what rises in the dark and what it reveals in us. Welcome to Dusk and Dreams. Let's begin. Across the world, in cultures separated by oceans, centuries, and languages, humans have told remarkably similar stories about what happens after death. Not the details, not the names of gods or guardians, but the shape of the journey. Again and again, the soul does not vanish. It travels, and almost always, it travels at night. In ancient stories, the afterlife is rarely a place you simply arrive at. It is a passage that must be crossed. There is often a road, or a river, or a forest, or a descent into shadow. Sometimes the soul walks alone. Sometimes it is guided. Sometimes it must answer questions, release memories, or leave pieces of itself behind. But no matter the culture, one thing remains constant. The journey begins when the light fades. In Greek myth, the soul moves toward a dark river, its surface quiet, reflective, unmoving. In Norse lore, the dead travel through cold and twilight, where sound is muffled and time feels suspended. In Mesoamerican traditions, the soul passes through long nights and trials, each one less about punishment and more about transformation. Even in cultures with no written mythology, oral traditions speak of the same thing. A dim path, a narrowing world, a sense of crossing from noise into stillness. Night is not the enemy in these stories. It is the condition. Why night? Because night is already familiar to us. Every evening we rehearse this journey. We let go of the day. We release control. We surrender consciousness. And we enter a place where time bends, identity softens, and the rules of the waking world loosen. Sleep is the closest thing we have to death that we return from. And so, it makes sense that our ancestors used night as the language of passage. What's striking is how gentle many of these myths are. They don't rush the soul or force it forward. They allow for pauses, for memory, for recognition. In some traditions, the soul lingers for a time, visiting familiar places, listening, learning what it means to no longer belong to the world it knew. In others, the journey unfolds slowly across days, weeks, or even years, as though the universe itself understands that endings need space. Darkness becomes not a void, but a buffer, a threshold, a compassionate pause between what was and whatever comes next. These night roads tell us something important. They tell us that humans have always believed the soul deserves guidance, that transition deserves ritual, that meaning does not stop simply because breath does, and that if there is a crossing to be made, it should be made gently, under cover of darkness, where nothing demands performance and nothing expects certainty. In the next part of our journey, we'll step onto those roads ourselves. We'll walk with the dead through ancient underworlds, meet the keepers of shadow and twilight, and listen to what these realms say, not just about death, but about how deeply humans want the night to be a place of continuity, not erasure. When we hear the word underworld, we often imagine fire, punishment, or judgment. But in the oldest myths, the underworld is something very different. It's not a place of torment, but a place of travel. A realm shaped by night, where the soul moves slowly, deliberately, through darkness that is meant to teach endurance, release, and transformation. To understand this, we need to walk one of those roads ourselves. So tonight, we follow the Aztec dead into Mictlan. In Aztec belief, most souls did not rise upward after death. They went inward, downward, into the night. The journey to Mictlan did not begin immediately. The dead waited. Their bodies were prepared with care, and offerings were placed beside them. Most important of all, they were buried with a dog, a small, humble companion whose purpose was not protection, but guidance, because the road ahead was long. The soul's journey through Mictlan lasted 4 years. 4 years of travel through 9 regions, each one darker, quieter, and more stripped of the living world than the last. Not to punish the soul, but to free it. First, the soul reached a river, wide, cold, unforgiving. This was a Panahuacalhuya, and only the dog could help the soul cross. Without companionship, without trust, the crossing could not be made. The dead learned immediately, no one walks the night alone. Further on, the soul passed between mountains that crashed together without warning. Then, across a field of obsidian knives where the wind itself cut like glass. Through freezing darkness, through swirling ash, through places where sound disappeared and identity began to blur. At each stage, something was lost. Pride, fear, memory, attachment. Not violently, not cruelly, but inevitably. This wasn't a test of worth. It was a process of unbecoming. A slow undoing of the self that no longer belonged to the world of breath and bone. By the time the soul reached the final realm, Chikunamictlan, there was nothing left to defend. Nothing left to prove, only essence, quiet, and rest. At the end of the journey, the soul stood before Mictlantecutli and Mictecachihuatl, Lord and Lady of the Dead. They did not judge. They did not condemn. They received. You see, Mictlan was not hell. It was completion, a place where the long night finally ended, not in fire, but in stillness. When we step back, we see this pattern again and again. Hades is a shadowed continuation of life, not a furnace of pain. Hell is cold and quiet, a realm of rest and inevitability. Noon, the Welsh otherworld, exists in eternal twilight, a land of peace beyond struggle. Across cultures, the underworld is night-shaped because night is how humans understand transition. Darkness slows us, softens us, removes distraction. It allows the soul to change without being watched. These stories tell us something gentle and profound, that death is not a sudden drop into nothingness. It's a long, patient walk through darkness that knows what it's doing. And that the night, the same night we enter every time we sleep, has always been humanity's way of imagining how the soul moves from one state of being into another. But myths do not emerge in isolation. They grow from the human need to make sense of loss, of endings, and of the great unknown. So next, We turn from the underworlds themselves to the mind that created them, to the psychology of night, death, and dreaming, and why the darkness has always felt like a doorway rather than a void. When you step away from the myths themselves and look at them from a distance, something quietly remarkable appears. Cultures that never met, civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, people who spoke different languages and worshipped different gods still imagine the path to afterlife in nearly the same way. Not as light or noise or simple nothingness, but as night. That isn't coincidence. It's psychology. The human brain has always associated darkness with transitions. When light fades, our senses soften, our attention turns inward, and time feels less rigid. The boundaries of the self loosen. Night is when we stop performing who we are and start experiencing who we feel like underneath it all. This is why sleep feels restorative, why dreams feel symbolic, and why the mind uses darkness to rehearse endings and beginnings. From a psychological perspective, death is the ultimate transition, so we imagine it using the same language our minds already understand. When someone we love dies, so many of us don't imagine them vanishing. We imagine them going somewhere. Walking, traveling, crossing. That instinct isn't denial, it's meaning-making. The brain struggles with abrupt endings. It needs continuity to integrate loss. Stories of night journeys give us that continuity. They say, this isn't an ending. This is movement to a new chapter. Dreams play a role here too. In dreams, people who have died often appear not as memories, but as companions. They speak calmly, they guide, they reassure. Neuroscience suggests these dreams help the mind process grief and attachment, but emotionally, they do something deeper. They allow us to say goodbye without finality. They allow love to continue in a different form. Night becomes the meeting place between what was and what still matters. Our ancestors understood this intuitively. They didn't rush the dead into judgment, nor imagine souls falling instantly into reward or punishment. They imagined journeys that took time. That required patience. It honored the weight of a life lived. Underworld myths are not about fear of death. They're about respect for transformation. They acknowledge that letting go is a process. And perhaps that is why the afterlife is so often imagined in darkness. Because darkness is not nothing. It's the space where things change. It's where seeds take root, where the body rests, where the mind dreams, where grief softens, where identity reshapes. Darkness holds us when we are no longer strong enough to hold ourselves. So when humans imagine the soul traveling at night, they aren't surrendering to fear. They are trusting that whatever comes next deserves gentleness. Before we move into our final reflection tonight, I'd like to invite you into a guided moment. There's nothing you need to do perfectly, nothing you need to believe, nothing you need to achieve. If you're somewhere safe, allow your body to soften. If you're listening while resting, let the surface beneath you support your weight. And if at any point you'd rather simply listen, that's perfectly okay. The night will meet you where you are. Begin by noticing your breathing, not changing it, just noticing the gentle rise of the chest, the slow release. Inhale and exhale. Again. In and out. Let the day loosen its grip. Let the edges of thought blur slightly. Let the world dim. Now, in your mind's eye, imagine that you are standing outside. At night, the sky above you is deep and wide. Stars scattered like quiet witnesses. The air is cool, but not cold. Still, but alive. Ahead of you is a path. Not a road, not a trail, just a soft, open way through the dark. You are not being asked to walk it, only to notice it. As you stand there, you become aware of a small lantern resting near your feet. Its light is warm, steady, not bright enough to blind, just enough to see what's close. This lantern is not urgency. It does not pull. It does not rush. It is simply presence. You pick it up. Feel its weight in your hand. Solid. Reassuring. This light belongs to you. With the lantern glowing softly, you step forward. Just one step. The night does not close in. It opens. The path ahead becomes clearer, not because the darkness retreats, but because you are no longer afraid of it. You sense movement nearby, not behind you, beside you. A presence. You are not alone on this path. You do not see a face. You do not hear words, but you feel guidance. A quiet knowing that says, you are safe. You are accompanied. You are not crossing today. This is not an ending. This is a meeting place. Ahead, the path widens slightly. You can see a gentle boundary. A river, a gate, a veil of mist, a line of shadow. This is the threshold. You are not meant to cross it, only to stand here, to rest, to acknowledge. If there is someone you miss, someone whose presence still lingers in your thoughts, you may sense them here, not as a body, not as a voice, but as a feeling of recognition. You don't need to speak. You don't need to ask anything. Simply allow the connection to exist quietly, without demand. Love does not require form to be real. Now notice your lantern again. Its light hasn't dimmed. It hasn't flickered, because it was never meant to be given away. This journey does not take anything from you. It only reminds you that you are held, even in the dark. It's time to turn back now. Not because you're being pushed away, but because you are still living. You thank the night, not with words, but with breath. And slowly, you step back from the threshold. The presence beside you does not follow. It stays where it belongs, watching, waiting, trusting. As you return, the path shortens. The stars feel closer. The air steadies. You set the lantern down. It remains lit, always. Begin to notice your body again. The surface beneath you. The rhythm of your breath. The room around you. There is nothing you've lost. Nothing you've left behind. Only a reminder that the night is not an abyss. It is a companion. And when you're ready, we'll return together to our final thoughts for tonight. And that brings us to the final place we'll rest tonight. Not a myth, not a theory, but the quiet truth these stories leave behind. When all the stories are told, when the gods step back into shadow, and the maps of the underworld fade into myth, what remains is not fear. It's companionship. Across cultures, Across centuries, humans did not imagine the soul being abandoned in death. They imagined it accompanied by dogs, by ferrymen, by guardians, by ancestors, by the land itself. Even when the journey was long, even when the night was deep, the soul was never meant to walk alone. That tells us something important about ourselves. We do not fear death because it is dark. We fear it because we imagine being left behind, or leaving behind someone we love. And so we told stories where darkness did not mean isolation. It meant guidance without spectacle, presence without demand, a quiet holding. The night became not an enemy, but a companion. Think about the way night works in your own life, how it slows you, how it softens sharp edges, how it invites reflection instead of reaction, how it gives you permission to rest from certainty. Death, in these ancient stories, is imagined the same way, not as a moment of judgment, but as a long exhale, a release from effort, and a return to something quieter. Whether you believe these myths literally, or symbolically, or somewhere in between, their message is gentle, that endings deserve patience, that transformation takes time, that love does not vanish when form changes, that meaning continues even when answers do not, and that the dark, the very thing we're taught to fear, may be the most compassionate space we know. So when you find yourself awake at night, thinking about loss or change or the great unknown, remember this. Humans have always trusted the night to carry what they could not, to hold grief, to guide transition, to soften the crossing between what was and whatever comes next. And maybe that's why, even now, when the world quiets and the lights dim, the night still feels like a place where something watches gently, where nothing is rushed, and where we are allowed to let go, not into nothing, but into the dark that knows how to hold us. It's been a privilege to guide you through another night here on Dusk and Dreams. If this episode offered you a moment of calm, stirred your curiosity, or gave you space to reflect on the deeper questions we all carry after dark, I hope you'll consider following or subscribing wherever you listen. Your support helps us continue building this community of night-minded souls. You can find Dusk and Dreams on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. To learn more about the show or connect with me, visit our website at breakgrid.com, follow me on Instagram at Yarrow Diamond, or find us on Facebook on Break Grid's business page. If tonight's journey brought up thoughts of someone you've lost, or left you wondering about the paths we all eventually walk, you're not alone. If you feel called to share your reflections, memories, or questions, I'd love to hear from you. Your stories help shape this lantern-lit community and remind us that none of us are walking these questions by ourselves. And next time, we'll return with another midnight exploration, continuing to wander the spaces where myth, mind, and meaning meet after the lights go out. But until then, if the night feels close, if your thoughts drift toward the unknown, or if you find yourself standing quietly at the edge of something unseen, I hope you'll take comfort in this. Across cultures and centuries, the night has always been trusted to guide what cannot be rushed, to hold what cannot be carried alone, to hear what feels unspoken during the day, and to soften every crossing. After all, the night listens back.